Hey, everybody. Today we're going to talk about a show called Spartacus, which aired on STARZ. We recorded this episode a while ago, and afterwards we had an interview with the amazing Erin Cummings, who plays Sura in the show, the wife of Spartacus.
We put a short segment of the interview we had with her at the very end of this episode. If you want to see that full Erin Cummings video interview, sign up as a free member on our Patreon. We'll notify you when we put that up and other bonus content. We, at some point, recorded us sort of talking in one episode about the next 3 episodes of Freaks and Geeks following the pilot. We're not sure exactly what we're going to be doing with Patreon or if there's any human being at all who's interested in paying for even more subpar co-pilots content.
I'm in!
I've already sold it to Sean. But go there, sign up as a free member, and you will be notified when the Patreon is activated, and Sean and I will be awash in riches.
Why didn't you go into advertising?
I think it's pretty clear.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Co-Pilots. I am Sean Conroy.
And I'm Andy Secunda.
On this podcast, we talk about TV pilots, the first episodes of television shows. Sometimes pilots become long-running series. Others don't make it past that first episode.
We're going to talk about all of them. The great pilots, the bad pilots, the weird pilots, the forgotten pilots. We are TV writers, but it should be noted that we are the dumbest TV writers you know, so all of these are just our dumb opinions.
So dumb. So the show we watched this week was about the Roman Empire, and I'm curious to know what your background is in terms of like studying that stuff or being exposed to that stuff.
Well, I'm a historian about that era of Rome. I taught a college class, and
I had no idea.
Yeah, so I bring a lot of background to the series, and a lot of the authenticity issues bump me from the beginning.
Right.
No, I'm a complete ignorant. I'm generally an ignorant person.
So you didn't like study, because when I was in high school, we had to study either Latin or Greek, like it was required.
Oh no, definitely not part of my.
So that was like a part of the academics all through high school, was all that stuff.
Is that a Catholic school thing?
I don't know. I never studied Latin, to be clear about that.
Right.
I studied Greek instead.
It's about studying the
An
origins.
even more dead language than Latin I studied. So that was useful. But we were exposed to all that Latin history stuff. And you know how you're in high school and you're like, oh my God, this is so boring. I wish there was a way to make this more interesting. Mm-hmm. And I just think if we had had stuff like this when I was in high school, it would have been way more compelling to hear about the Roman legions and so forth.
A lot of guys running around with a dildo on their head.
I would have been in 100%.
Like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. I had this all wrong.
These guys were nuts. Dead language, my ass. You're speaking my language.
Sure. Yeah, I have the barest minimum, and I was hoping you could bring to bear some perspective on what seemed authentic and what didn't.
Well, I think they do. Okay, so we're talking about Spartacus, of course, which is based on a true story. Spartacus was a real guy who lived in around the early 70s BC. Mm-hmm. So he was
a lot of bell bottoms and a lot of flayed collars. And
it was right after the Summer of Love, and right before the assassination of Julius Caesar. No, it was sort of as the Republic was coming to a close and as the Empire was rising. Like that was what happened when Caesar was killed, was that it became an empire and no longer a republic. And that's one of the things I think they try to pay attention to on this show, is that, for example, Albinius, who is the father of Alithia and the father-in-law of Glaber. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yes.
He is a senator, which was a huge deal in Rome at that time, or in the Roman Republic.
Right.
Because they're not in Rome, obviously, they're in Capua. And so everybody is sort of classified according to their political position. Like Glaber is a legatus, and I don't know exactly what that means, but it puts him in charge of some certain number of men in the Roman army.
Right.
Like a general of some sort.
Right.
And you know, there's a lot of attention to little historical details that we read about when I was in high school that were totally dry and boring, but I think they're presented in a way in this show where it suddenly becomes very compelling. There's even a thing that they do consistently through the whole series where people have conversations while they're shitting in the public toilets, and then they wipe themselves with a stick that has a sponge on the end of it and put that back in the toilet. Like that was, and there's a Latin word for that stick, and I don't remember what it is, but that was what people did at that time. And you kind of don't get that when you're just reading a history book in high school, you know?
It's a Latin word for I'm going to have some major bacterial bacterial
No
situation
wonder the
on my
plague
hands.
spreads so quickly. Tersorium is the stick?
It's a sponge on a stick.
Sponge on a stick. Okay.
Sean, we shouldn't do the thing where you stick it back into sewage, but maybe sponge on a stick has some, maybe we got a thing going on here.
Yeah.
Little giveaway.
If you go to our website, you can buy a sponge on a stick with Andy and my face on it.
That's right. The co-pilot sponge on a stick.
But anyway, I do think that they try to pay attention to historical detail and be specific about stuff on this show.
I do wonder, was Stephen DeKnight, who was the thing I'm always fascinated about is like, well, how did this show come to be? How did the person who sort of was at the helm of it get to be there? Because prior to this, I believe he was on sort of mostly on Buffy and on Angel, which I was a huge fan of. Smallville. But was he an ongoing writer on Smallville?
He was Superman.
Oh, well, see, that I didn't even know this. He's a real man of all trades.
No, I don't. I just know that was one of his credits was Smallville. I don't know
and
exactly
it seemed like he was from there. It seems like Daredevil came after this, where he had a period where he ran Daredevil, and he did run this. Did he start as the showrunner on this? He was the creator of this, obviously. And sort of how did he position that? And I'm assuming, based on where my sense of where STARZ was at that moment, is that it was one of those sort of Mad Men-y situations in terms of like AMC was looking for something.
They were trying to brand themselves.
Right. They were trying to break out, and that's when they always take chances on people who are maybe earlier in their careers and on projects that are a little bit off the beaten path or a little bit, weirder. And so I wonder, he was the first showrunner of this, or are we not sure?
I believe he was.
So it's just like handing a guy a show who had never run a show before and on such a weird thing. So that's my question. Number one is like the positioning of that and what his experience was. But then beyond that, I'm curious if it was like, we want to do something in this space, because the thing that I said to Sean,
That's me.
Sean is,
By the way, I'm Sean Conroy.
oh, and I'm Andrew Secunda.
Yes, we're listening to.
You guys must have been so confused.
We're listening to each other talk, and you are listening to us on this podcast.
That's the pecking order of this Roman army. We are the legatus. Is that what it's called?
The tersorium.
Oh, we are the tersorium. What does that one mean?
That's the sponge on a stick.
Oh, I see. Right. That's what he just said. I'm curious about also, you're talking about the authenticity was because here's just to cut to the chase. Sean had been talking to me about this. This is one of the Sean Recs. It's a Sean recommendation.
I like just saying Rex because it could go either way. like Sean
more,
recommends it, or it's a fucking wreck.
Right. Or some kind of Latin spin of Sean Rex.
I like that one too.
Oedipus Rex.
King. That means king.
Oh, is that what it means?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. He really does know his Latin.
Never took Latin, by the way.
Oh, right. You took Greek. He really does know his Greek.
I actually do.
Fine. And the history of things that he's recommended to me, most of them probably, are in the category of what I would deem maybe dad trash TV. Like things that dads would like.
Can you give a specific example of that?
Strike Back?
Yes, that's a good one. We'll get to that one at some point.
So this one, but a lot of them, and the ones that are the ones that I've followed up on and I stand by, which I think I've said already numerous times, is like, The Wire being the most quintessential one, Deadwood, which is, these are ones that a lot of people recommend to you, but Sean was like on it, like, you have to, I know I've been pushing, you have to watch these. And of course he was 100% right. And this was another one that came up quite a bit. And so in my head,
you're like, this is going to be like those other shows.
This is going to be the Roman version, the Roman gladiator version of The Wire. And long and the short of it, it is not.
It is not. It is not at all the Roman version.
And what
of
I
The
was
Wire.
shocked about, as I was just saying to Sean before we started, is it's 300. It is 100%. They saw the success of 300 and they were like, well, let's do a TV show. And so my curiosity is, did they have that as a target in mind?
Right.
And brought it to Stephen DeKnight, or did Stephen DeKnight come to them and say, I want to do 300?
Right. Do we know what year 300 came out, Kevin?
2006.
So there you go. It was perfectly situated.
Right. So they had
2006.
It was enough time to say this was a success. Let's do something like this, because that's how networks are. It takes a couple years to get things in process. So it may be that they said to him, this is what we want to do.
Right.
Or it may be that he was like, I took Latin in high school. Can we do a show about a tersorium?
And then his friend said to him, you took Greek. You go in there. You're going to get your ass handed to you.
And he said, actually, I really do know Greek.
So these are the things that I'm curious about. Mainly, and this is really my headline, it's so boldly, and I believe you, having faith in your taste, that the show develops, and even in this episode, it's incredibly fun and ridiculous, but that it develops into more of, a
Complex.
That's complex, telling of that story, and it's not just panning with a globule of blood as it falls to the ground.
No, but that stays consistent through the whole series, through all 4 seasons of the series. And I do think that's one part of it that I really enjoyed and was very fun. I mean, look, I'll be honest. I worked running Mr. Pickles for 4 seasons, and that show was a horror show. It was literally a horror cartoon.
Yeah.
And people might not know this, but animators love to draw blood and bones and people being ripped to pieces. That's just a thing that people really have fun with. So we did a ton of that on my show. And so I think that kind of ruined my ability to look at something and be horrified. But I think, and I know you're saying it's like 300.
Going to war.
It's like 300, which it is, but it's such a much more extreme and cartoony version of 300 than 300 even was.
Well, how do you mean cartoony? Because it definitely, is it more extreme? It's been a bit since I've seen 300.
Me too, but I just don't think they had these crazy slow motion, relentless, like
it was Zack Snyder. So
skipping ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
There's the scene at the end of this episode where the character that starts by fighting with Spartacus is in the arena by himself.
Right.
And he looks at Spartacus and he smiles, and then he gets his throat slit.
Right.
And blood sprays everywhere.
Right.
And they cut to Spartacus being horrified by this guy's throat spraying blood everywhere.
Right.
Then they cut back to this guy who is still spraying blood. Like the excess of going back to his slit throat spewing blood.
And I could be wrong, and I don't remember
way over the top.
if it's when they cut back to it in the present later in the show or if it's there. But that is, I believe, the moment when we follow you don't stay on the guy. We pan with the blood, watching it fall to the floor and splash.
There's a lot of moments like that in the end of this episode.
Right. It's like they're turning this kind of ridiculous gore into the part of the artistry, if you will, of the show.
Right. Which I really enjoyed it, Again, we're getting way ahead, but there's the moment when Spartacus goes to fight the 4 gladiators at the end.
Yes.
And of course he's successful because he's Spartacus and we know he's going to come out winning. But the way he dispatches each of them is incredible. And one of them, he chops the guy's leg off.
Amazing.
Then while the guy is still upright and the leg is flying away, he chops the other leg off.
Sure.
Because, of course, what else would you do but chop both legs off?
Of course. If you chop one leg off, you're not a craftsman. Mm-hmm. But whatever the case, That's
what I mean. I think 300 did some of that. Like, I'm just thinking immediately, because the other thing they do a lot in this show is the slow motion thing, where these things are happening very slowly. And I'm thinking of that moment of, by the way, it's Gerard Butler in 300, right?
Right.
He's Leonidas.
I believe so.
So I just want to plug again my podcast that I'm doing called Butler Did It, which is just an examination of the entire Gerard Butler oeuvre. We're going to go through every film of his.
We also have a sponge on the stick with the Gerard Butler's face on it.
There's that moment where the messenger comes to tell him that the Spartans need to surrender or something, and he screams, "This is Sparta!" and then kicks the guy into a pit. Do you remember that at all? Very slow motion.
Of course I
remember that. And the guy falls backwards into the thing. And there's no blood or anything, but it's like they took moments like that and just turned them all the way up on this show.
But here's what's crazy. Because I'm a fan of Frank Miller, and I'd read the graphic novel 300 before I had seen the movie, and so I was like, oh, this is interesting. And what's interesting is like that's a perfect example of a moment of, and maybe I'm misreading the moment. It's in a graphic novel. It's open to interpretation. But he kicks the guy in there, and he says, "This is Sparta, period." And the guy's like, "What do you think you can get away with this?" And he basically...
And you think he shouldn't have said period at the end of the sentence?
Yeah, and I was like, that's weird. Why would he spell out the word period?
No, you're saying in the novel he did not exclaim, he just said it.
No, and of course, Zack Snyder, following his own inimitable style, does it in slow-mo and has him, "This is Sparta," which, of course, to Zack Snyder's credit, that became the most memorable moment in the thing. Yeah. But to me, it was like, well, he kind of took some of the coolness out of it because he just calmly kicked him into his death.
This is Sparta. Get in there. Do you know where you are? You're in Sparta, period.
You're doing a little bit of a Trump there.
You are in Sparta. This is Sparta. A lot of people are telling you this is Sparta. I am Spartacus.
So anyway, yes, while you were, I'm sure, correct, and that they take it from a 7 to a 10.
Yeah.
I do think it was just like, it's without question, like that kind of slow-mo, freeze frames, fake CG backgrounds, everyone seeming like they're floating in a cartoon. That is like quintessential Zack Snyder,
300, yeah,
who is building on quintessential Robert Rodriguez. And it's clearly what they were like, we're just taking it. And it's interesting to me that it's like, it's unashamed. Shamed. So I just find it fascinating. Yeah. And the other person that's sort of in the rundown that I think would explain some of the tone and the style and the gore is Sam Raimi.
Yeah.
Who's one of the executive producers. Whereas Rick Jacobson, and so I don't know how much you have to bear on that.
Jacobson worked with Roger Corman. I mean, that's where he came
interesting.
from. He got a directing job from Roger Corman when he was 21 years old, and that was the beginning of his directing career. So.
Because he did Cleopatra 2525, he worked on Xena.
Right. So that's the other connection here is that Robert Tappert, who is the co-creator of the show with DeKnight, his roommate in college was Ivan Raimi, brother of Sam Raimi.
I see.
So Robert Tappert was involved with the original Evil Dead, was the producer of the Evil Dead. So that, I think, explains some of the background, too. He's also married to Lucy Lawless, which explains her involvement in this.
And Sam Raimi was obviously instrumental in Xena. So all these things tie together as like pointing in the direction of kind of, whereas all of Raimi's prior stuff, including Evil Dead, has a certain lyrical kind of intentional sardonic comedy, even though it's dark, to the violence and the gore. This is like, that's great, we're going to do that, but we're taking out all of the irony. And it's just...
Well, here's what I would say about that, which is, and this doesn't help with the pilot, but going forward, it's actually a very funny show.
Interesting.
Like, John Hannah is amazing on this show.
Yeah.
And he's only introduced at the very end of the episode in this one. But he's pretty great. And he's just a bitingly funny guy.
Yeah. And yes, he's one of those guys who's just always solid whenever he's in something. And I kind of was like, oh, that's interesting. And I guess... Do you think this was sort of early in his arc? No, he'd already been a journeyman for a while, right?
Yeah, and had done a lot in 4 Weddings and a Funeral. Like he was, but this was the big payoff for being a journeyman for so long, was that he got to do a couple of seasons of this show.
Right.
But let's go back to because I think this episode of Spartacus, like Gaul, according to Julius Caesar, can be divided into 3 parts.
Mm-hmm.
And the first part is what happens with Spartacus that makes him end up being enslaved. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the first, I guess, like 2/3 of the episode.
Yes, which is impressive that they don't. We talk about the structure of pilots. It's very well structured because part of my problem even with the movie Gladiator, which this is also sort of.
Well, even the music in this is like exact.
Which is why it's a genius idea
yeah.
for a series, just sort of
I
building
meant to
on
look
that.
up who did the music on this because I was like, there has to be some connection to whoever was the composer on Gladiator.
It's like, even in Gladiator, to me, my reaction to Gladiator, as much as I appreciated Gladiator, to me, it's sort of like the moment, spoiler alert, that Russell Crowe is both the sort of bookend moments. I'll give them a show like they've never seen, and him cutting the guys' heads off with 2 swords at the same time.
Right.
That's what the whole movie should be, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
And that kind of is what this series is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's that crazy, like, adolescent male violence, you know, which I find very fun. I am ultimately just an adolescent male.
Yes.
You know? And I think just to go back to the 300 thing, and this, you could go either way on this, but I really like it. And it makes me, to me, it shows the underlying humor of the show is that I know 300 was obviously animated and CGI and whatever, but I feel like this is such a much cheaper, less convincing version of that.
Well, this is
in every respect.
This is one of the things that is both astonishing about it and I kind of admire about it is right from the first overhead shot. And I assume that, are they in Rome at the end, or is that some outline? Capua, that's right. The overhead shot of the arena. And it's like, there's so many shots in this that are obviously CG, but most of them fall into the category of more of a 300 style, where it's like, we're intentionally heightening the colors, making everything very contrasty. The actors pop out from the background in a sort of unreal way. We're intentionally creating this feeling of comic bookish, cartoonishness and unreality, but in a way that makes it feel like this is an intentional style choice. Whereas there are a lot of shots, and that first overhead shot is one of them, where it's just like, I don't know, we only had 10 minutes to make this. We don't know. We didn't have time to fully render this.
STARZ didn't have a lot of money, you know.
But what's amazing is a lot of people, it'll drive them crazy. I'm someone, and this is how I kind of feel about Once Upon a Time. Did you ever see that TV show?
No. I've seen Once Upon a Mattress. I don't know if you saw that. There's a P.
It's a spin-off.
Okay.
Yes, the old musical theater.
I'm not going to lie. I'm a big musical theater guy.
No, I respect that.
Yeah.
Weirdly, Once Upon a Mattress far bloodier than Spartacus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But also just so cartoony.
Yeah. Anyway, Once Upon a Time, they had a similar situation where it's like, okay, well, this is a weekly, at least 22 episodes. I don't know if it was 24 episodes, a season show. A lot of Disney characters, a lot of backgrounds. They go to other lands, tons of effects. There's certain shows that just approach it as like, I don't know, we're just going for it. We're going to show you a big dragon. We're going to show you a thing. Most of it's going to look kind of questionable at best. Right. And that's just it. You're going to be watching a cartoon a lot of the time. And I'm kind of fine with them being ambitious and telling me the story that they want, and you know, let the effects fall where they may.
Right. Well, I feel the same way. I really enjoy it. And one of the things I love about this show is it really makes me laugh because they'll show huge crowd shots of everybody in the Capua amphitheater.
Right.
Thousands of people.
Right.
But it's all cartoons. then they'll cut in on like 9 of them
that are real.
that are so excited to be there, that are real people. Yeah.
And they'll do that thing to make it seem like a style choice, which also I think is very Zack Snyder, which is just like, look at all the people. Look at this amount of people. Look at these 10 people.
But even that...
before you saw all of them, but only for a second. Now you see these people.
Even that they do, I think, effectively
The
in
caterer.
this episode.
Get the caterer out of that shot. Get the caterer. Okay, look at these 9 people. Look at these 9 people.
Each of you needs to move your arms slightly differently in this shot, because there's only 9 of you, and you all need to look different.
Okay, well, 4 of those people look the same as the people on the other side of the one guy in the middle, but only look at these 5 people.
But I do think even like it's that thing of like turning a weakness into a strength, because there's a couple of moments in this episode where they do those kind of transitions, like when Spartacus is leaving his wife to go off to war with the Romans, and he sort of walks away from her and puts his helmet on, and then it starts snowing, and then it gets dark, and then he's in a battle. And that just all happens in the space of like 8 seconds.
That's my example of... Because prior to that, I was like, oh boy, this is going to be a crazy ride of just terrible CG. And that's the moment that's like insane CG where nothing looks real, but it's a definitive stylistic choice where it's like, we're just doing this in like blending everything with CG in a way that really feels like a stylistic choice.
And maybe because I've watched the show a couple times before, I feel like that's true even in the scene before that, where he goes out to see her as the sun is rising, which clearly looks like somebody painted a sun on a sheet and then hung it up on the wall and put a lamp behind it.
It does in retrospect. At the moment, I was like,
what are they doing?
What's going on?
Yeah.
And then it's when you see exactly that shot that you're talking about when he's walking into the storm, then I'm like, oh, they're just, they don't care. They're just fucking going for it.
And then
which is awesome.
Yeah. And the other transition like that is there's a moment when we're in Glabber's tent, I think.
Yeah.
And they kind of zoom in on the map and then zoom out to the actual place.
Yes.
And then zoom back into his office or whatever, where he's with his wife. And it all happens in like 4 seconds, and it's like zip, zip, zip. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
And that was a moment where, again, it's also very much a sign of the times and who they're appealing to, which is teenage boys like you and I. Not in body, obviously. In body, we're like broken bones about to turn to dust, but in spirit, we're teenage boys. Right. And what I wrote down in my notes is just like video game, because it just feels like you're like, where am I? Let me hit the map, zoom out.
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's where I am. Okay, I'm captain. Yeah. Okay, back.
And they do. I think they also do that when he is captured by the Romans and ends up on the ship. They do something with the map, and then they're in the ship with him when he's chained up unconscious,
which is also a fantastic way to sort of shortcut the storytelling with all of these devices.
Well, it's like when in old movies or
or Raiders of the Lost Ark,
I was going to say Indiana Jones, where you just see the dots crossing the map, and it's like we don't have to see the guy flying the plane or getting in and out. It's just, okay, we were here, now we're here, and this was a transition. You know? But the first 2/3 of the movie is all about Spartacus's where he was before he became, because we open on him in the Colosseum or the amphitheater. I guess it's an amphitheater, not the Colosseum is, I think, just in Rome. I'm not sure about that because I took Greek, which I actually do know. But
where's the Parthenon?
It's over by the market
gas station.
So he's listening to the sounds of the fighting in the arena, and blood is dripping on him, and then the rest of it is just a flashback to how he ended up in that position. So he's in Thrace. The Romans want help with some tribe of barbarians. There's a whole meeting with the Thracians where he speaks up even though he's not supposed to. And there's an elder there who, spoiler alert, later gets killed in the battle with the Gedi, I think they're called, or the Gedi, I don't know. the elder says something like, I wish I had written it down, but it was like,
he said, I got it.
the truth falls from his mouth.
He speaks out of turn, yet the truth falls from his mouth.
And that's another thing I love about this show is they sort of created their own language in a way that is, to me, reminiscent of trying to translate. I mean, I took Greek, but trying to translate these ancient languages, which had a lot of the same parts of speech, but were constructed very differently. So when you try to translate them, it comes out strangely, and everybody talks in such a mannered way on this show.
Well, everybody doesn't talk.
Not everybody, yeah. Some of them are just like Cockney blokes.
Well, that's the thing, is there is unbelievable, filthy, like
Right.
homophobic, fucking misogynistic.
Right. There's lots of, but even that, there's one, I can't remember if they said it in this episode, and maybe it's because it's John Hannah's character who says it all the time, but the oath he always uses is Jupiter's cock. He's always yelling Jupiter's cock. But anyway, that's guy,
that's like saying good gracious.
Yeah, or bless you.
But the thing that struck me about he speaks out of turn, yet the truth falls from his mouth, just seemed kind of insulting. Like he's like, the truth is just vomiting out of this kid.
Yeah. Well, but that's what I mean. Like it's almost, the truth falls from his mouth is almost poetic to me.
Yeah.
And it's just an interesting way to look at the language that they are pretty consistent with over the entire 4 seasons of the series.
Right. But is it, so you feel like it has an authenticity, the odd
I don't think it
to
necessarily has an authenticity. I think it just is a stylistic choice that reflects the way I perceived those languages when I was a kid. That they're not like English. So even though these people are speaking English, they're speaking it in a way that anybody who speaks English would never speak. Does that make sense?
Yes. I guess if it feels authentic to that, then it's certainly, you can give it credence. I feel like I sort of felt like, is this like a dumb version of basically is like ancient Rome, except that they spoke dirty, in the same way that like Deadwood is like, we're going to go for it with the cursing and everything, except, he was going for more almost Shakespearean style.
Right.
Spin on the language.
Well, I think that's a whole other part of it, because there is that element always of the decline of the Roman Republic and everybody just being out of control at that point. So how do they portray that? And in this show, like, again, skipping ahead to the crazy orgy scene that happens later in the episode.
Yeah.
That is supposed to show that the Roman Republic is out of control. And these people were wiping their asses with sponges on a stick. And yet we see this scene of incredibly beautiful people with no clothes on. And it's like, okay, what's the reality here? I don't think that that's what they actually looked like, but we have to show that they're losing their shit and still have them be beautiful people that would appear on TV,
What do you mean by losing their shit?
That the Republic was falling apart and everybody was just drunk and gorging themselves on stuff and fucking, and nobody was paying attention to actually making sure the country was run properly, or which enabled people like Caesar to come in and seize power, because everybody was just so sensual and narcissistic.
Well, I think that's where I am on the side of the show, is that it is taking the spirit of the story and the characters and the situation, and then saying, what's the most sensationalistic, low-minded, crowd-pleasing version of this?
Right. How can we show beautiful naked bodies all the time?
Right.
Male and female.
Right.
Because it's not really happening in this episode, although we did see several of the gladiators come out at the orgy.
Yeah.
But a lot of the scenes in later episodes are just training scenes at the gladiator school, and it's just a bunch of dudes in tiny loincloths, scene after scene after scene after scene.
I would love to know the breakdown of the demo of this show.
Who watched the show? I think it was mostly just me.
Well, somebody must have watched it because they did like 9 spin-offs.
They did 4 seasons.
But I do wonder
yeah.
how many were straight men of all ages, or who was watching this show.
Right. Do you want to go to the Magic Mike movie, or do you want to stay home and watch Spartacus?
Sure. Certainly, everyone in the show is a dreamboat. There's no getting around it.
So they spend well, yes, they are. There's no denying that Andy Whitfield is a beautiful man.
Without question. He kind of had a Sean Bean quality.
Yes, young Sean Bean.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're listening, we're about to give away something that happened in real life that affected the course of the show. If you would prefer not to hear a spoiler, please. And by the way, you should know that Andy and I just had a half-hour-long argument about whether we should do this or not. Just cut ahead to
38 minutes and 42 seconds.
If you would prefer to not hear anything about the background of the real life situation, not to mention, as Sean pointed out, the historical reality that might give away things in the future of this series.
Right. We'll see you on the other side. And unfortunately, in real life, like Sean Bean did in every show ever, Andy Whitfield died after season 1.
Oh, that's spoiler.
Yeah, it was very sad. He had some form of cancer, and they thought it was in remission, and then it wasn't. And so I haven't even looked this up. I just think that I know most of this. But what ended up happening was they made the second season the prequel to the first season.
Right.
So the second season happens before the first season and ends, I think, 5 years before the first season starts. Mm-hmm. But it's a lot of the same characters. You have something, Kevin?
Yeah, so from Wikipedia at least, it looks like he was diagnosed at the end of season 1. Mm-hmm. They pushed back season 2 because he was going to get treatment. Mm-hmm. But they still wanted to move forward with something, and so they developed a prequel in which he would provide some voiceover but wouldn't appear. And then later on that same year, he said he couldn't even come back for the voiceover, and then it sounds like it just got worse rapidly. And then before he died, it says they sort of had the conversation and he gave the blessing for them to
said it was okay to keep going.
Yeah, but it seems like season 2 was created under the idea
they
that
thought he would be
come
involved.
back again.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's such a sort of big part of it, but it's such a huge spoiler. But it is a spoiler that's built on real life where he actually passed away. So I don't know. I'm trying to think if the show structurally changes, is that a spoiler?
But I also feel like we already know where the series is going to go. It's like when they did Rome and we knew at the end of season 1, Caesar was going to die. Mm-hmm. Spoiler. In Spartacus, we know that they got caught and that he was executed. Mm-hmm. So everything else is just the particulars of how we get to that, which is the fun of the show.
But even that, like, I didn't know he was caught and executed at the end of the series.
Oh, I see. So you really have paid no attention to anything ever.
Well,
because that's in the movie too. Like that's.
Oh, I know he was caught and executed in his story, but we don't know when that happened in this series. But yeah, I agree that structurally talking about it is interesting.
You think it's bad to say like they took a break from the forward motion of the series and went back to before season 1 and did that. Then they came back in season 3 and picked up where season 1 left off and then just went straight forward from there.
I'm not sure.
I just think it's really interesting that they did that and that the season 2, which they were not planning to do, is fucking great. You know?
They weren't planning to do it at all?
No, because it was done so that they didn't have to use him. Like the story of Spartacus is he escapes from the ludus, he takes the slaves with him, they go off into the mountains, they start fighting with the Romans, eventually they get caught, Spartacus and everybody else is executed. But they were like, oh, we can't use Andy for this season, so let's take John Hannah's character and see how he got to where he was in season 1. And that's hard to do. You know, it's like Better Call Saul. It's hard to pull off the thing that happened before the interesting thing you've already done. Okay, where were we? So a lot of what goes on in the first 2/3 of the show is establishing the relationship between Spartacus and his wife.
Right.
Because that's so important to his mindset when he is captured later on in the show and becomes a gladiator. His whole life becomes, how can I get back to her?
Right.
And how can I see her again?
Right.
So we have the moment where he's leaving and she doesn't want him to go. And then she tells him about the dream she had where she saw him kneeling before a red serpent.
Right.
And we know this episode is called The Red Serpent. So that seems significant.
They're certainly not leaving anything to chance. One thing that was interesting is that when they say goodbye, and it's really nice, they do a good job of building up their relationship within the tone of this show and having it seem like these two
I was thinking the same thing. It feels
absolutely beautiful people
yeah.
seem to really love each other.
It feels like a Harlequin romance or something. And then at the end, this beautiful woman who we're hoping to get as a guest on the show says, "Kill them all."
Right, which is fantastic.
Yes.
But then the other thing I was going to say is when he's about to go off, I don't know if I'm skipping ahead where you are, but when he's going to go off to war, and
you're allowed to do that, by the way.
Well, I don't want to break. I don't want to talk out of turn, and let the truth fall from my mouth.
What are you talking about?
But when they have sex, I was kind of like, all right, buckle up. I know what this show is going to do with this. And it was a little bit of a misdirection because it was kind of like, yeah, it's two beautiful naked bodies writhing against each other. It's so understated in comparison to what I expected that I was kind of like, I guess maybe this show is going to be a little bit more elegant than it's so funny in contrast
with the later scene
to what we see later. And they're just like, oh no, they want to establish that this is a more of a relatively adult,
that's
mature
the whole thing
connection.
Is that it's about how they're different from the Romans.
Right.
Like the whole thing is about him saying, we have to honor our word to the Romans. We have to do what we told them we would do.
Yeah.
And the Romans are so depraved and decadent and don't care about any of that stuff.
The two of them are Harlequin romance. The others are Screw magazine. Not even Penthouse.
Fuck you. Do you remember that Al Goldstein show on Manhattan Cable?
Sure.
What was the name of it? It was like something
After Dark.
Yeah, I don't remember. I definitely watched it quite a bit.
Well, see, here's my thing, and maybe I'm a prude. It was so awful.
It was horrible. But I just found him such a crazy character.
Even as a teenage boy, I was like, this is gross. I feel like I'm hanging out with gross people. I don't want to watch this.
Midnight Blue, yes. And I just thought it was so funny that this weird old man every week would just have a thing where he would say, fuck you to somebody.
Yeah.
It was a lot of wasted time. But you're right. That's a good contrast where one of them is very sweet and they love each other. They love each other so much. They say things that are clearly to indicate that. What does he say? He says, she says when he goes back to rescue her. So these guys, the Thracians, get betrayed by the Romans. Clearly it's, the Thracians are the Roman auxiliary, as one of the guys says, like, welcome to the Roman auxiliary. So they're disposable. They're just, cannon fodder, basically, which it was very difficult at that time to be cannon fodder since gunpowder had yet to be invented. So you really felt no sense of purpose.
Even more useless.
Yeah.
Than
no sense of purpose at all.
Cannon fodder. Now, they had the way they present it, which obviously is instrumental in the story and, sort of sets it up that he gave his word and all this stuff. Would the Thracians have even had a choice, do you know? Or was this...
I don't know. I would assume so, because otherwise they're just slaves and they have to go out and be controlled by people.
Didn't the Romans conscript people against their will? I mean, they must have.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that worked.
Yeah.
I do think they made deals with people.
But whatever the case, they definitely go out of their way to establish, even to the point of the infighting amongst the Thracians, that Spartacus is... I gave my word, even if it's to the Romans and the Romans aren't dealing with them like straight shooters. It's like, I gave my word to constantly draw the distinction between the Romans and Spartacus.
And even in the moment or it's before the Romans come, but they find out they're heading east instead of west, which is where the bad guys are heading west to where the Thracian women are. And they know what's going to happen if they catch the Thracian women. The Romans are heading east to fight against Mithridates' army, the Greeks, because Glaber...
Hey, this guy's going to know about Sean's going to have a lot to say.
Because Glaber, this is where it starts to get into the political stuff. He wants to move up in the world. That's what the whole show is really about, is you have a certain station in society and how do you become equal to the people above you? And Glaber wants to be important. He wants to be a senator, not just a legatus.
Just like Hamilton.
Yeah, exactly. This was the original. There is an episode called The Room Where It Happened on Spartacus.
Sure.
But when they find that out and the Romans show up and Spartacus is saying, we need to go the other way, we need to defend our homes, and Glaber loses his shit and says something about move to formation or whatever he's screaming at them in that moment.
Yeah. Is he in the graphic novel? It's just a period.
Spartacus grabs the bridle of the horse to keep it from getting scared.
Right.
And the bridle, so none of this is his fault. The bridle
that's
breaks.
another thing that sort of seems like gilding the lily, that he's trying to grab it to steady him,
help
and then
him,
it seems like he was fucking with him, and it's like, do you need that? He was already acting like a dick. You gave your word. Do you need to?
And they really want to establish he's a good guy.
They really do.
And then they, of course, kill all the Romans except Glaber, who they leave lying in the mud, and say they think he's dead, so they leave him there. And there's also, again, I just love the moment where you see Spartacus switch from like, I'm going to defend these guys, and he grabs the spear and kills the guy who's riding away on the horse.
And is he hesitating in that moment, in your opinion? Because he's like, I know if I throw this, then that's the final
it's all
straw.
in. Yeah.
Because up until then, he hasn't done anything.
He's not in the wrong.
Yeah.
Like, things went badly, but he is not in the wrong.
But also, fantastic kill when he throws the spear at the guy.
And
it hits his neck or it hits his head? It hits his neck. I think it's neck. Yeah. It's sort of hard to tell, but it definitely neck is more bloody and awful.
And then he goes back, and just when we see that Sura is about to be attacked by a bunch of
Orcs,
bad guys.
I believe.
I was thinking the same thing.
So that they dress them in skull costumes and everything.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, wait a minute. This postdates. I'm trying to figure out whether this postdates Game of Thrones or not.
Predates it. Game of Thrones came out in the spring of 2011.
Right, because this is very similar to
Lord of Bones.
I mean, so many characters in Game of Thrones. But yeah, that's a perfect example, not to mention orcs. And that really ties into a larger thing, which is this is based on historical fact, however loosely or authentically. It is clearly a sword and sorcery fantasy show with no sorcery. It's clearly and these guys in their monster costumes are such a perfect.
And I also think it's interesting. I know we know that they're wearing like animal skulls or whatever on their faces.
Yeah.
But I feel like you never quite get a clear view of what they look like. They're just weird and menacing looking.
Sure, which is the intention. Just killing meat, killing evil meat.
Right. And so just as Sura is about to be in big trouble with these guys, we hear the sound of whistling through the air, and she ducks just in time for Spartacus's sword to flip into the chest of the guy who was about to attack her.
So I got a lot of things to say. First, it is an awesome recurring move that he just throws his sword to the point where later in the scene, when does the guy say, "Throw your sword"?
Oh, I don't remember.
I believe that it might be Drennis that says it to him. It's so well known that that's his move that he says it.
Do you think there were some people who called him Drennis the Menace?
It is his attitude. He's fucking cussing up a storm, that guy.
He cunts.
Clean it up, Drennis.
A little light.
But that's the first thing. The second thing is, he throws it at the guy.
It could have killed her
depending
easily.
So much on that. His wife is like, my wife knows me. If I throw this sword, she'll know when to duck.
Well, he got the whistling sword.
Sure. Or maybe he made the whistling sound to let her know. That was the second thing. And the third thing is, for most of this scene, literally, I would say it had to transition to the next scene for me to go, all right, I guess I was wrong. I was certain this was a dream sequence. Because the last thing is him sort of leaving. You don't know how far away he is. The barbarians attack. And the CG is so heavy in this scene of feeling unreal that I was like, this must be a dream sequence, right?
Right. She looks up and we can't see what she's looking at. And then they come around and show, and we don't see what it is. And then the monsters come out of the fog, basically.
Yes. So it was only after they get out of the scene that I'm like, no, guess it was real.
This really happened. And then they run back to see what's going on with their village. And of course, their village has been burned to the ground. It's gone.
Right.
It was a very Conan the Barbarian moment of like, I have no home anymore.
And do you think he seems very obviously affected in the scene afterwards when they're sort of, figuring out where they're going and
South. It'll be south.
In their lives. Yep. Do you think it's I created this problem? Or do you think it's just sadness that everybody's dead?
I never thought about it as I created this problem because I don't think he would think about it that way. Like, I think that he was trying
Spartacus always denies responsibility. There's a real problem with that.
He knows he's honorable. He knows he was doing the right thing. He was trying to grab the horse by the bridle. Is it the bridle? I don't know.
I think it's called a strap.
Get the horse by the strap. But I do think there's an element because he says the thing about like everyone we know is gone or something like that.
Yeah.
And then he says, I have people.
Here's the other interesting thing.
South.
I would love to ask your friend if we get her on. Earlier in the show, there's a tear that I'm almost certain is CG.
Oh, could be. I think in this scene as well.
In this scene, I thought, this one seems real.
Oh, yeah. We'll find out.
But maybe I'm wrong.
We'll find out.
Maybe they have one thing where when it comes out of her eye, it's CG. And then they're like, well, we're going to do a CG thing later. So then when they cut back to her, there's a drip down her cheek.
Right.
That seems real.
But again, we're really setting up how important this relationship is. Yeah. So just looking at what they said in this scene.
Yeah.
I think he is in some way feeling a sense of responsibility for what has happened to the town, but I think it's more about, it's not a town, the hamlet. Let's say the hamlet. It's more about
the suburb.
Right. The bedroom community. I didn't get back here in time to save everybody in town.
Right. I wish I was 1,000 men.
I wish I was 1,000 men. Exactly. And then,
by the way, if you're going to just choose a number,
a million.
Yeah. You do much better odds.
I wish I was 1 billion men. That's billions with a B. She says, you did what you could. You came back for me knowing it could mean your life. And he says, there is no life without you.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's how I feel about you, Sean.
Thank you. A beautiful sentiment.
Yeah.
And we all know what that's like to feel that way about someone, but not to be a gladiator. So then they go to sleep, which you should never do when the Romans are hunting you.
Not to ruin this beautiful moment.
Yeah.
Is it Drennis or is it one of the orcs that says, I'll fuck your women, I'll fuck them all?
I don't know if it was Drennis, but it was definitely one of the Thracians.
One of the Thracians.
In the middle of the battle.
Yes. Yeah. And so what part of ancient sort of, Roman speech, Latin speech, do you think they're kind of sort of putting a twist on?
I will tell you that was one of the things that came up quite a bit when we were in high school was like, yeah, this is this ancient language, but it was just like ours. They said dirty things all the time.
Oh, there you go.
So, and you can imagine that in high school, that's what the teachers had to say to get people to pay attention, So I don't remember what the Greek swears were, but they definitely existed, But
the other thing that's so fascinating is whenever they're talking, and I'm curious if you felt the same thing, and it may be because a lot of it was CG and it was on set and they were doing all these, there's so much that's created that they were like, fuck it, we'll create the whole thing. There's a lot of noise in the warfare. The voices and the performances almost sound like they're dubbed like an Italian gladiator film.
The one in particular that stuck out to me was the guy who said, they blow their horns, a Roman dog barks, and the gods shit on me. Welcome to the Roman auxiliary. Like that guy felt like he was not actually saying those things.
I guess he might have just been, the performance might not have been there.
I did think a lot of the performances were like,
created in post.
Yeah, maybe that was why, but I was like, this is not a real person saying anything.
You can easily see maybe they cast a lot of these people based on their look and their physical, ability.
And they were shooting in New Zealand, so they were like using lots of people who were just locals, which is why everybody talks with a
Kiwi accent.
British accent.
Yeah.
So then they're sleeping, and then the Romans show up, and Glaber. It just, again, is a funny shot to me of him like they're always riding over hills because that way you don't have to show what's beyond the hill.
Right.
So you can just put it on a sound stage and have a horse just appear out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And they capture Spartacus and they take his wife away.
Yes, which is the most biblical of shots that they have, and the most like Zack Snyder. It's a big tie-in. When they're dragging her off.
Right. I think it was that moment where they did that crazy transition of like all these flashes of various things happening of how he was going to end up.
Yeah.
Wasn't it in that moment?
I believe
and he's
you're
on
right.
and then he's on the ship and regains consciousness.
And I wonder how much of that was created in post. I wonder if there was more of a scene. There was stuff that they were just, because it really is impressively brisk. It really cuts from thing to thing. They cover so much territory.
Right.
And that's like a perfect moment of, his life is falling apart. We'll do an effect. We'll do a montage.
Right.
And
it's a montage of a bunch of different scenes that takes 5 seconds, less than 5 seconds.
Probably less, yeah.
4?
I mean, it could have been 4. It could have been 3, but that's probably stretching it. So I'd probably say about 3.
It was longer than 2, no doubt.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we have these important characters from the first 2/3 of the show. We have Glaber, the Roman bad guy.
Yeah.
We have his wife, Alithia, who we haven't even talked about, who's that exotic kind of woman who shows up to your apartment wearing a fur coat and nothing else. and then we have Sura, and then we have Spartacus. And those are the people we meet in that part of the show.
They really set up effective villains because Alithia is like...
awful.
It's so great. She's so manipulative.
Yeah.
She's all about sort of pushing Glaber into his... the issues he already has, the ego and everything.
Right.
It's just really...
She keeps bringing up how her father is going to be disappointed if he doesn't get involved with the fight with Mithridates.
Right.
And he knows that the father is his ticket to the Senate, so he needs to do what the father wants him to do. And she's just playing him the whole time. So anyway, we know all them. And then kind of the next section to me is the stuff at the villa, at Albinius's villa.
Yeah.
And that's where we see her talking to Glaber again and saying there's whispers in the Senate about how... So it turns out Glaber fucked up and lost half his men in trying to chase after Mithridates and has blamed all of it on Spartacus, that it was the fault of the Thracian who, did this. And he's going to quiet the whispers about his cowardice and inability by giving the people blood.
And this seemed to me to be, obviously I don't care, I want to see the gladiator stuff, but this seemed to me to be a bit of a motivational stretch. Or do you feel
In what sense?
That he would have been able to cover up a mistake of that size by bringing back some Thracians to execute?
Well, I think that, I hate to say it, it's fucking Trumpian before Trump. It's changing the conversation. It's distracting people from what really happened.
Which, in fairness, I guess is what the gladiatorial games were.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's him going, if I just have these Thracians killed, that's what everybody will be talking about, instead of my fuck-ups.
Right.
So that's his plan. Albinius comes in. He's very upset. Alithia talks to her father. And then we have the craziest scene in the episode that is just about pure decadence.
Right. Which, again, you can justify as like we're showing how depraved and broken, the Roman civilization is at this point.
No, I think that's exactly what it is.
But it is also playing to
the adolescent boy.
Hey, we're stars. Can you get some asses in the seats?
I mean, there's one shot where a woman is just showing off her clearly artificial breasts for like...
Hey, Sean, you don't know what's
at least more than 2 seconds,
But I mean, of course...
Yeah, you're right. I don't know that they're artificial. They just seemed that way to me. I don't know.
The most amazing money shot, as I mentioned at the top of the show, it was not just a little person running around with a mask and it seems like a unicorn equivalent of a dildo, lifelike dildo coming out of the center of his head. But what also confuses me even more is I think he has mouse ears on, unless those are supposed to be elephant ears and it's some weird...
I did not even notice because I was too busy studying the dildo.
And he's so prominently displayed...
several times.
Like they're like, This is fantastic. We cannot leave a slimmer of a chance, a glimmer, a minute. We cannot leave
A single iota of a chance.
That's right, that they will miss this.
Yes. Zoom in on the dildo.
It's so funny. It's dancing around. And I also love that at the beginning of the show, during the first sex scene, I was like, hey, this show's really gonna have a light touch. It's just
And it was just crazy.
Breasts.
Fuck you. Welcome to Midnight Blue. Yeah. And here's the other thing, and they really make a big point out of this too. And I actually felt badly for the actresses who had to do this, because there were 4 actresses who had to lie in pools of water the entire time.
Oh, that's such a good point.
And that is because the city of Capua during this episode is going through a horrible drought.
Right.
And Albinius makes a point of saying, I brought water from Rome, and he has used it to fill up the pools in his house so that naked women can roll around in them with rose petals.
It's fantastic. And it's funny that even in that scene, beyond the actresses having to endure it.
Well, I just think of it from, because I'm a journeyman actor myself, and I just know that it can be very uncomfortable.
And you've done at least 3 scenes having to in the nude in a pool. in scenes, right?
Andy, I was nude from the waist down.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to.
I refuse to go topless.
Sean, I judge no one for their career choices. Whatever they have to do is whatever you have to do.
So these poor actresses had to roll around in this very valuable water brought all the way from Rome to Capua during a time of drought, to show that these are the wealthy people who don't care about the commoners.
And the other thing that I was going to say was that the thing you're saying did hit me when I was watching. So it's effective that he's talking about the waste of water and how they're.
And meanwhile, there's people just rolling around.
And I remember thinking like, but what about that water? They're going to need that water.
Right.
Why are they just letting people be in it?
And
I don't care if they're beautiful naked people.
Not to bring this up again, but those women wipe their butts with a stick with a sponge on it,
with Sean and my face on it.
So in that water, after they roll around in it, it's not going to be, it doesn't mean they won't drink it, but it's not going to be good for drinking.
It's really not.
Giardia. Well, I don't know if they had Giardia back then. But anyway, we meet some really great characters in this scene who are hugely important to the show. What I like about that in terms of a pilot is, obviously, this is Spartacus's show, and we spend so much time with him, building him up, finding out about him, what his morals are, what his values are, what his wants and needs are. And then at this point in the show, it's like, okay, now let's get to the other people and see if we can introduce them as quickly as possible, but in a way that gives us some of what's going to be going on later on in the show.
Which is really, you can say, one of the most unique things about this show, and where STARZ kind of really planted their flag in an interesting way, is I think that there's, once in a generation, some person who's like, I'm going to do a porn, but I'm going to do it classy, and I'm going to do it with real actors, and I'm going to do whatever. And in some ways, this isn't the porn version, but this is the, this cheesecake, beefcake. There's it's completely sensationalistic. It's completely bloody and gory. They spend a tremendous amount of time setting up the characters and giving the backgrounds and setting the emotional arcs of each of the characters in a way that is kind of unheralded for this level of satisfying B-movie television show.
And that never goes away. I mean, there's always orgies going on and people fucking and people taking baths together. The sex element of the show is there all the way through.
Yeah.
But what happens in this scene is they start to set the wheels in motion of all the entanglements and the political stuff that goes on over the course of the whole series.
Yeah.
So first we meet Albinius because he's important, although he's not really that present throughout the episode. But we meet Batiatus and Lucretia, which is John Hannah and Lucy Lawless.
Yeah.
And they're sort of the other stars of the show besides Spartacus. And there's such a great exchange between Batiatus and Lucretia and Salonius, who is the other guy who trains gladiators. They call each other old friends, but Batiatus is shitting on the gladiators that came from the other guy because they're only using 2 of his gladiators and they're using 6 of the other guy's gladiators.
Right.
And he wants to be more important to the games. And then Salonius comes over and says, your gladiators will be a great intermission between the actual good fights between my gladiators. Like they're just being so wonderfully passive aggressively mean to each other.
Are they the equivalent of people in the entertainment industry?
Yes.
So just like,
And then Salonius
Salonius
is basically hitting on Lucretia the entire time,
right,
in front of Batiatus. And
right. Now I have to, you don't have to go into a spoiler, but I have to assume Lucy Lawless, because when I realized it was her, I was like, oh, I assume this has to be a big setup for this character in a more major way. And I don't know whether I should ask you this question, so you can deem it yourself. I may ask a spoiler question.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing I wondered is, because she just seems to be a lady of the Roman
Republic.
Sorry, the lady of the Roman Republic.
I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, by the way. But in my head, the empire really started after Julius Caesar.
I guess my main question is, do they find occasion to let Lucy Lawless cut loose and use her physical prowess in these?
Not to my recollection, for the most
interesting.
part. She's just a beautiful, noble woman. Yeah.
And you're saying, no, let's play her straight. It's sort of interesting.
Yeah.
In a gladiator show, no less.
Yeah. No, she does not. In my head, I don't remember her doing a lot of fighting.
Yeah.
But she's hugely important to the show. I mean, she's, again, like I said, one of the main characters. Anyway, so we meet them. We meet Batiatus and Lucretia. Batiatus is I don't know what they call it, but he runs a ludus, which is a gladiator school.
Okay.
And she is his wife. Salonius also runs a ludus. Mm-hmm. And they are jockeying for social position in Capua.
Mm-hmm. And this immediately interests me, as like, my perception of gladiators is that they mostly came from slaves and criminals in that era, and maybe
they are slaves. They are slaves. Yeah, I mean,
the victims or the gladiators too.
The gladiators too.
They're all slaves.
The gladiators are slaves. Although,
but I guess they have to be taught.
This is and they fight to the death.
Do they have commercials or their billboards, and the people are like, sign up? It's like,
but I do think that was a thing that gladiator. Do you know how long the era of gladiators lasted in that time?
Yes, but I'm gonna let you talk about it because you like to show off.
It was 900 years.
Holy crap, I had no idea.
900 years they were using gladiators to distract people from what was really going on.
I mean, that's an impressive. That show is the longest running show of all time. You got to say, it's really impressive.
Think about when we are going to have had the Super Bowl for 900 years.
Sean, can you imagine the residuals on that?
Well, a lot of it was AI towards the end. So, and Zaslav was taking a huge chunk for his own bonuses. And what I was going to say, and I don't think this is really a spoiler, but if it is, cut ahead to 46.
All right, you don't have to. Look, I'm on the side of no spoilers.
You could decide you wanted to be a gladiator. And enslave yourself, basically. Because if you fought well, you could earn money. So there's a character later in the show who is just a regular dude who's like, I'm in debt. I want to help out my wife, so I'm going to become a gladiator.
But he's still enslaved for life.
Yes. He has to do what they say, and he has to fight.
Carackers.
All right. I'm trying to remember. He might have had the possibility of buying his freedom at some point, because the gladiators are all for sale.
Like, well, what kind of deal are you going to give me?
Yeah, he got in a big argument with himself. I don't think I'm worth that much. I think I am. Who are you talking to?
I was negotiating with the guy.
Oh,
for
I
his
see. We meet also Barca, the beast of Carthage, and Crixus. What do they call him? The god of blood and sand, the undefeated Gaul. And those are two of the gladiators who are really main characters going forward.
It's very interesting because what you're talking about is these characters that we do not need to meet
in the pilot.
Any of them.
We just see
the ones that run the schools. Those feel like, okay, that you're building up.
Well, because Batiatus buys Spartacus at the end of the episode.
It's almost like two pilots. It's like 2 half-hour pilots back to back.
Right. It's like Cliff in the pilot of Cheers, he has like 2 lines. And in this episode, I think Barca and Crixus don't even speak. They just stand there and look beautiful.
Right.
You know?
But it's like, why? Why are they in there? It's very interesting. And it's really just like, no, you're going to fill out the world. There are going to be a lot of different guys.
And I think maybe also because it means that by the time we come back to episode 2, it makes sense that Spartacus already knows them.
That's true, but you could just start episode
proximity.
2 and, by implication.
Although as I'm saying that, that's not even true because they're all separate in that. Like, he doesn't come in until after they have been on display.
Right.
He comes in with the 6 Thracians at the end.
Right.
So I'm totally lying and bullshitting. I apologize.
Classic Conroy.
Yeah. So we meet all of them. We find out Batiatus is kind of this is a great demonstration of Batiatus's character going forward and why I think John Hannah is so funny. He says, Solonius secures 6 of his ill-trained simians. That man has his fingers in all the proper assholes. He wiggles them and everyone shits gold. Like, he's always saying stuff like that,
Right.
Because he's so conscious of his social position and wants more.
Right.
Then we get to the last part of the show, which is the battle in the arena. And that's when we come in on Drennis the Menace fighting against
Mr. Wilson.
As always. Well, what I think is interesting is actually those characters do all have names. All the gladiators at the end who are in the arena actually have character names instead of just being like Gladiator number 1, Gladiator number 2.
You can't sell the action figures otherwise.
But the Arcadios is the gladiator with the red serpent on his shield. So once Drennis is killed...
By the way, just to address that for a second, really, this is a perfect example of the ability with structure Stephen DeKnight shows in this episode. Because you certainly feel him setting up Drennis earlier, but he makes such a strong choice of being this filthy mouthed kind of gross, somewhat despicable,
and somebody who
character.
starts out being against Spartacus,
an antagonist to him, and then
they become friends,
right?
And
It's such a fast, like brisk fashion that works. Like you're not like, oh, that's not believable. It's like everyone in the show seems insane and amped up to 10. It totally seems reasonable, and then it sets up perfect. Even though we've already sort of seen him. It sets up perfectly his death at the end, so you're like, oh no, Drennis. He was a great character. Oh no. It's like, that's crazy.
The guy who stole the wine from Glaber's tent.
You spent like 3 minutes on that guy, and I'm sad that he's gone.
Yeah.
Here's another thing I want to say. It's a quick moment, but the moment when Spartacus is in the cell waiting to be brought on, and I don't know if he sees Drennis be killed.
He ultimately sees him, I think.
And he's being
looks, marched up. Oh, before he gets out of the cell.
Before he gets out of the cell. And he looks back and you see the pile of corpses that they're just hurling in next to him.
Yeah.
It's so effectively bleak and upsetting and just like, oh man, can you imagine? And it kind of made me think of another moment in the show, which really illustrates how well this show is going to do these moments of like, how horrible it was in this time, is when Spartacus wakes up and they're all in the ship and their arms are strapped above their heads in the bowels of this ship in the middle of a storm, and how badly they're being treated.
And he starts to struggle, and I forget if it's Drennis or the other guy says, just be careful, you've been out for a couple of days.
Right.
So he's been in that position for days.
Doesn't stop him from killing, how many? 4?
4. Right. So Drennis is killed, and then it's Spartacus's turn in the arena to fight against the guy who Drennis just fought against.
Right.
And then we go back to the box seats where Spike Lee sits during the gladiator battles. And
antagonizes Reggie Miller Gladiator.
And the guy, Glaber, says, I saved a surprise.
All my sports references are going to be outdated, FYI.
Well, that was a memorable. I mean, that's like saying, oh, sure, Babe Ruth called his shot, but who gives a shit? Like, that's a iconic moment.
I see.
The battle between Spike and Reggie there's like documentaries about that.
I know.
But we cut back to Glaber, and Glaber says, I saved a surprise, and the doors open, and we don't know what's coming out. And I feel in that moment, I'm thinking of the movie Gladiator. I'm thinking of Russ Crowe in the middle of the arena there. And I'm like, is it going to be a tiger? Is it going to be an elephant? A bear? Like, all of these were animals that they had destroy people in those battles. And of course, it's 3 other gladiators come out. So now it's 1-on-4.
Yeah. And are you disappointed that there's not a bear and a tiger?
I mean, I knew there wasn't, but I just feel like they're setting up like such anticipation of like,
right.
you know, and it's 3 gladiators. And I wish I had looked this up, but each of them is a different style of gladiator. Like, one of them is the guy who uses the axe. One of them is the guy who uses the spear. And one of them is the guy who uses the net and the trident.
Right.
And we already have the guy in the arena who's using, I think it was the gladius. I mean, that's where they got the name from, was the particular sword that everybody used. But they make a specific point of having, it's like, we got a wide receiver, a linebacker, a defensive end, and a quarterback.
I just don't think it was fair to the guy with the sponge and the stick that they sent in there.
I kill him, but it's very slow. Bacterial infections take a while. This could take a few days. I hope you guys packed a sandwich.
I gotcha. Oh, man. As long as you don't wash.
It's just the guy running around the arena.
You are in serious trouble.
It's a tiny cut. What's the big deal?
We don't have antibiotics. You're in serious trouble.
It's been 3 days. I'm very woozy. But, of course, Spartacus begins to lose, and there's that great... Again, this goes back to the cartoonish gore element we were talking about before, where he gets cracked in the back of the head with the handle of the axe.
Yeah. What's so hilarious is every shot that Spartacus takes throughout the course of this pilot is a death blow.
Right. And there's so much blood that comes out of the back of his head.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, part of that is because head wounds just bleed.
Right.
It doesn't mean it was like a fatal thing. It's like if you get hit in the head, if you cut your head, it bleeds a lot.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
But he ultimately ends up killing all of them. And the crowd, and that's the problem too, is the crowd gets angry that it's 4-on-1, and they start to take Spartacus's side.
Right.
And they start chanting, live, live, live. And that's when a lot of the weird machinations start to happen in the Spike Lee seats. Glaber is disappointed because he wants this guy to be killed.
Mm-hmm.
He wants the Thracian to be killed because he cost him half his army.
Mm-hmm.
The senator, Albinius, is like, well, the crowd likes him.
Right.
We got to do what the crowd wants. Maybe we should let him live. Batiatus sees an opportunity to both get another gladiator for himself, to help out Glaber, and to shit on Salonius, who really has nothing to say in this moment.
Right.
Because he shits on the 4 guys who were killed, who are all Salonius's men, and says, I'll buy him from you.
Right.
Which helps everybody out and puts him in a better position, and ends up buying Spartacus. And we kind of end there, I guess, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
But I just love that moment because there's so many things going on in Batiatus's head of like, how can I use this to my maximum advantage with every single person sitting in courtside seats?
Right.
You know? And it makes me excited to watch episode 2.
It does. And I think that's always a question we have of where, I don't know if it's a ranking or if it's just a statement we make, like, would we be interested in watching episode 2 based on the pilot?
I've already watched it, but I would also say based on the pilot, I would love to see what happens next. Because who knows? Like, he's just been purchased by a guy who runs a gladiator school. We know this guy is able to take out 4 gladiators, but who knows if that was just luck of the draw? Where is this going to go? Is he going to get, I mean, because really what his thing is I got to do whatever it takes. There is no life without Sura.
Well, that's what's also so impressive is, again, it being such a crazy, like, single-minded vehicle for nudity and violence, yes, that each character's, like, drives and wants are so clear and intense. Each one, everyone in this pilot.
Right.
And it is kind of perfect in that way, in a sense of, like, if you're in with what this pilot is giving you in terms of the elements.
Weird, the weird shit, the gore, the sex, the violence, all that stuff.
And the stylized.
Because I know a lot of people would just run away from that.
Right.
Even when you were talking about it at the beginning and you did not have a great reaction right away.
I just wasn't sure. But I would say many pilots that have their single-minded intention. We're going to do a ridiculous, trashy nighttime soap. We're going to do a hilarious family sitcom that pierces. They have their clear MO. Don't hit the target.
It's still muddy at the end of the pilot.
Yeah, or it's just like, well, that was a bad execution of that. This thing aims for what it aims for. It hits the target cleanly, and it leaves you all these motivations and story to go like, yeah, great, show me more of that.
Right.
If that's what you're in for, which I am also.
Right. And I guess the one thing I forgot to mention is in this moment, they ask Glaber what this guy's name is, and he's like, I never bothered to ask. So they don't even know who this guy is, and that's when Batiatus says, he reminds me of the ancient Thracian kings of old, Spartacus. And the whole crowd is just let him live. He lives. Spartacus. And the whole crowd is just going, Spartacus, Spartacus. A huge crowd of thousands, and then down to 4 people chanting Spartacus, like a close-up on 4 of them or whatever, chanting Spartacus. And then we're out on that.
And then you go to the map and you see even tinier people chanting Spartacus.
So yeah, I would definitely watch episode 2, even if I hadn't seen it already.
A very entertaining pilot. And I give it 6 sliced legs.
Mm-hmm. I give it 4 guys with a net and a trident, because I know that's the shitty gladiator. That's our show, everybody. Stick around for our interview with Aaron Cummings, who played Sura. Go sign up at our Patreon so that we can notify you when the full video interview goes up with Aaron. We will be releasing episodes of this podcast on the first and third Sunday of each month going forward, so look forward to that. Also, follow us on social media at Copilots TV. And if you're wondering where to watch the pilots that we're discussing, just check the show notes. We'll always have some indication of where you'll be able to find any of the pilots we watch, even the more obscure ones.
And you like our show, or do you love our show? If you could give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it would be incredibly helpful to us. We're a new, just sad and sweaty, struggling, failing podcast.
That's not how I see it. I think we're doing fine.
Okay, well, we each have our own perspective. And if you do give us that 5-star review, you will get your pilot's wings. We're also going to read a couple of these reviews in each episode to express our gratitude.
So you're going to send me wings in the mail, or how am I going to get these wings?
Oh, you're not, we're not sending or doing anything. We're incredibly lazy, but you can print out your own if you want on a 3D printer, or, send away to some kind of mercantile company.
I don't even know what that means. What if I hate your show?
If you hate our show, Sean, you can also just leave us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and you're in. Doesn't matter what you write. You can write anything you want in the comment.
And you might read my comment even if I write something incredibly negative.
I mean, if it's funny, or, if we're just feeling incredibly bad about ourselves that day, sure.
Great. That sounds fair.
So that's it. That's the end of our show. Thank you all for joining us. We are coming in for a landing. I don't have our final sign-off catchphrase yet.
He said, speaking of which, we have these guys that we've narrowed it down to for the role of Spartacus, and we've seen them be fierce and fighting and things, but he has to have this relationship with his wife, and we want to see the softer side of this guy because he's got to be able to play both. Is there any chance you'd be willing to come in just as a reader for our auditions? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll come in. So I go to, wherever they're holding this session. And the first person that's going to audition is Andy Whitfield, who, as you know, ultimately ended up getting the part.
Another question is were they just lying when they said that Sura didn't matter, or did that become apparent over the course of the shooting of the show? Because she is the reason Spartacus does everything he does, basically.
So Stephen always knew. And in fact, in his original pitch of the season, Sura was way more a part of the show than she ultimately was. From what I heard through the rumor mill, apparently one of the executives at STARZ had seen the show Rescue Me, the Dennis Leary show Rescue Me, and wasn't a fan of the storyline with his brother, who he kept seeing his brother's ghost and having conversations with his brother's ghost. He saw Sura as that. And he was like, I hate that. It doesn't work. We're not going to do that. So that was sort of the company line, was nobody's going to care about the dead wife. And thankfully, you know, Andy and I had incredible chemistry. We became instant friends, like really, really close, and worked beautifully together. And so what ended up happening was the dailies came back and they started seeing all these scenes. And for Andy, you know, one of the things that he had said to me was that the scenes with Sura were like a completely different show, because Spartacus had to be one character when he was a gladiator and when he was fighting, and then when he was with Sura, it was only me and Andy. There weren't any other people there. I mean, there aren't any other characters, you know what I mean? There were no crowd scenes with Sura and Spartacus. It was always just Sura and Spartacus, and they were so intimate. And I don't even just mean the physical aspect of it. I mean the conversations. They were the kind of conversations that, you know, you just go, wow, this is what love is supposed to look like. These are warriors together. And so
it's like the conversations Andy and I have on this show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really,
exactly.
that emotive, that connected.
That's why it works. Mm-hmm.
Really intimate.